Still here in the background is a generator which is being used to pump electricity for powerful floodlights, which the fire department has set up here on Northampton Street, pointing down the street which is totally flooded with water to illuminate the area. Actually, there are 3 lights in operation here. One is being used to illuminate the area. The others are being used to aid in the rescuing of people who are still stranded. And there are quite a few people who are still stranded on rooftops and in some of the buildings here along Northampton Street. Chief George Keller of the fire department told us a few moments ago that there are about a dozen people still in some of the buildings and on the rooftops. We have been able to spot 4 or 5 of them there. There are people sitting up on the balcony outside of the Hotel Easton. Incidentally, the water here has moved up Northampton Street now so that it stands on both sides about halfway beyond the Stotts Office Equipment Company on one side and almost to the end of the Surprise Department Store on the other side. It's all in advance of maybe 30 yards in the last 4 or 5 hours. The water is still rising. It's coming up steadily, although not fast. Just in front of us here, we note that a sewer has popped and water is bubbling out of that. There's a great deal of evacuation work going on here, not only of people, residents who are stranded in these buildings, but of equipment from the stores. Some of it has been brought out by boats. There is a small boat, rowboat, sitting grounded here right beside the Department of Highways truck, and other men in long hip boots, and some of them just in their every workaday clothes, are working at hauling furniture and showcases and office equipment and records and files and just everything you can imagine out of these various stores. The Northampton Street Bridge, we are standing directly in front of it on the back of this truck, looking at the free bridge over the Delaware River facing Phillipsburg. And it is an amazing sight to behold. The debris around the bridge is something to behold, stacked up against the bridge on both sides, on both ends, just piled in. Well over the bridge, the level far over the bridge. It will be quite some time before we ever have any kind of traffic. Here's an interesting note. We can see now just in front of the bridge, it looks like something trying to swim across Northampton Street. It looked like a little dog. However, I think it's probably just a tin can shining in the lights down here. The boat, which the firemen have here for their use in evacuating various people, is just about to go out. Chief George Keller is boarded, and they're moving out into the water. He's taking up the oars, and they're going down to try and evacuate some more people from this critical area here in downtown Easton on Northampton Street. And behind us here, in a roped-off area, there are literally thousands of people who have jammed the streets of downtown Easton to witness this scene here in the flooded area of Easton at the Free Bridge. We're still standing on the rear of the Department of Highways truck here midway in the water on Northampton Street, just above the Hotel Easton and facing the Free Bridge between Easton and Phillipsburg off Northampton Street. The activities are somewhat the same as we described them about 15 minutes ago. It's now 8:35. The water has come up a little bit. It is rising very slowly. The civil defense workers have pushed the crowds back to 2nd and Ferry Street. There is a rope stretched across Northampton Street to prevent people from coming down through here. The crowds are terrific. We might mention, too, that the only lights that are visible in any part of downtown Easton are those of the automobiles and trucks and so forth that are in the streets here, plus, of course, the emergency lights which are being used to floodlight the flooded area down here to aid in the rescuing not only of people but of equipment and supplies, and also to illuminate the area to prevent possible looting. An interesting sidelight that Art Fleischer mentioned to us as we came down Northampton Street earlier this evening, every clock along Northampton Street and in the general downtown area, of course, has stopped because of the power failure. And every clock is stopped on the moment of 12:19. 12:19. That was one of the dark moments of this Friday in 1955 when the power in downtown Easton was cut off. Friday, August 9th, days in Easton's history when the greatest flood ever known in this area poured into this city. 12:19, the lights went out and the clock stopped. The evacuation work is still going on down here. There are people on the roofs. It is impossible to get to the people in the Hotel Easton. We were told earlier that they had been able to evacuate some of the people. However, the water is not high enough to get the people out of the hotel onto the balcony, and it is now impossible to open any of the doors leading into the hotel because of the pressure. They were earlier able to float their boats right into the hotel lobby and pick the people up and float them right out again and bring them out to safety. That is impossible now. The windows in most of the stores are holding fairly well, although we wouldn't guarantee that they won't be smacked in by the pressure of this water before the evening is over. Some of them, we understand, already have given way to the terrific pressure. At this time, Chief George Keller and one of his firemen are out on the boat. They rode down Northampton Street, around the corner, wrong way on one-way Front Street, but I don't think there's much problem with that tonight, and apparently going down to bring out some more people who are stranded by this flood. We'd like to bring in Art Fleischer here for a moment. Art, you were here earlier this evening. I believe it was probably about 6 o'clock, which means that about 2.5 hours has passed. You were in this exact spot before, bringing a description of the flood waters, what they have done to the downtown area. What are your observations now, Art, as to the difference, the rise of the waters since that time in these 2.5 hours?
Well, Bob, the big difference, of course, is the lack of light. It's gone quite dark now overhead. The only lights, as you said, were from the fire department generator searchlights, big, powerful beams that will be on all evening long. And, of course, this scene gets more terrible as you watch it. As it gets darker overhead, the dirtier and muddier the water seems and more brutal. The big feeling that you get here is one of helplessness. You've just got to watch it come at you. And that's the most terrible aspect of the flood as we see it here at what is now the foot of Northampton Street, roughly on line with the end of Stott's office equipment. In another hour or so, I imagine they will have to move this the Department of Highway truck back further to get clear of the water. The civil defense people have now arrived en masse. They're moving the crowd back steadily, and it's a tribute to all the men who have worked so hard since late last night. The men of the fire and police departments, Department of Highways, civil defense, the National Guard have all worked very, very hard. It's beyond describing the self-sacrifice that these men have put in the past almost 24 hours. And if ever a group of men and women deserve a tribute, it's these men and women. They are rendering the highest kind of public service. From our next checkpoints, we hope to bring you a graphic description of the 3rd Street Bridge, the new toll bridge, and as many other spots as we can get.
That was Art Fleischer and WEST News editor Bob Lamb reporting from the site of the flood. We'd like to explain here that the portable tape recorder that is used sacrifices a bit of quality for the portability of it. So if the quality of the tape recording used in that particular report wasn't up to par, we would like to apologize for it and explain to you just exactly the reason for it. It's a very small portable tape recorder which can be used in situations like this, but it does sacrifice a bit of the quality that we use in broadcast purposes. The Forks Township Volunteer Fire Company announces shelter and food are now available to all flood evacuees at the clubhouse in Forks Township. That's the Forks Township Volunteer Fire Company. Mayor Mole of Phillipsburg has announced that any person or persons that are stranded in Phillipsburg can get food and shelter at the Phillipsburg High School. Also, please stay off Morris and North Main Streets as the traffic is very heavy and tied up at this time. And once again, repeat too that people are asked to stay out of the downtown Easton area. Thousands of sightseers have flocked to the site of the flood in downtown Easton and are hampering operations by the emergency crews. People who are not absolutely necessary to the emergency work are urged to stay away from the flood area in downtown Easton. Thousands of sightseers have flocked to the site of the flood, and they are greatly impeding the progress of the emergency work at the flood site. Dr. Frederick W. Ward, president of the Northampton County Medical Society, announces by confirmation of Colonel Brubaker of the Civil Defense Unit that any area in Northampton County needing emergency medical assistance beyond the capacity of their own doctors and medical personnel may have an authorized person call the Northampton County Civil Defense Office at Easton 9012. That telephone number of the Northampton County Civil Defense Office is Easton 9012, and they will call Dr. Ward. This society will do everything in its power to procure extra doctors for the area in need. George Weitzman, the first assistant district attorney, wishes to say on behalf of the district attorney's office that any vandalism that takes place in unguarded areas will be dealt with according to the full penalties provided by the law. Any vandalism that takes place in unguarded areas of the flood will be dealt with according to the full penalties provided by the law. The Civil Defense of Phillipsburg announces that evacuees in Phillipsburg are being housed at the firehouses as well as the high school auditorium. American Red Cross has set up stations to feed and house the people of Phillipsburg. And once again, this very important announcement from the Easton Fire Department. The Central Fire Station announces that the fire alarm system is not in operation. The fire alarm system is not now in operation because of the power failure, and in case of fire, you should call 7401. That's Easton 7401 or Easton 23031. Easton 23031. Over in Phillipsburg, the Phillipsburg Police announced that for any type of emergency in Phillipsburg at all, you should contact them at 51121 or come personally to the headquarters in the municipal building, South Main Street in Phillipsburg. No other facilities are now in operation. In Phillipsburg, call 51121. Mr. Donald Young of the Pennsylvania State Employment Service announces that the employment office will be open tomorrow for those employers who wish to get additional help due to the flood emergency. The address is 72 North 2nd Street in Easton. And Harry Snyder, the superintendent of finance at the post office, announces that all postal employees will be notified by telephone or by announcement on the radio on WEST when they should report for duty. All postal employees will be notified by telephone or by announcement on the radio when they should report for duty. Bud Palmer has reported that the Brown Lynch home, 3rd and Ferry Streets, will be open all evening for anyone who wishes to have a place to stay. There also will be free coffee at the Brown Lynch home, 3rd and Ferry Streets in Easton. The Easton Packing Company of 16th and Lehigh Streets announces that anyone with a freezer, if they do not open it, the food will remain frozen from 24 to 36 hours. Easton Packing will be open at 7:30 tomorrow morning, and if the power is still out, they will store any frozen food free of charge. Do not call Easton Packing now, as the food in your freezers is probably all right and will be for another 24 hours at least. If the emergency exists tomorrow, Easton Packing will remain open indefinitely to assist in the emergency. This is a public service announcement from Easton Packing. And the Deputy Coordinator of Civil Defense in Warren County and the New Jersey State Police have advised us that they are not permitting any traffic to move in the direction of the toll bridge at Portland. The bridge itself is open, but routes leading to the bridge on both the Pennsylvania and New Jersey sides are flooded. And police are turning back all traffic. Please do not try to use the toll bridge at Portland. You will only further hinder traffic, which is being turned back in New Jersey. Those are the important announcements at this moment concerning the flood, announcements which vitally affect many of us in the affected areas by the flood of 1955. Estimated at much more than $1 billion. Conditions remain critical tonight in the worst-hit areas. The floodwaters still are rising, although most of the rains have stopped. The raging floodwaters left a fantastic scene in their wake. Towns and villages by the hundreds were flooded completely. Men, women, and children clutched under roofs and treetops. The lucky ones were evacuated by boats or helicopters. Others were swept to their deaths. The flood's worst fury struck in New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Massachusetts, and western Connecticut. The waters crumpled business buildings. They snatched bridges from their foundations and rolled them downstream. Washouts and landslides rendered highways and railroads completely useless. Some road and rail routes were cut off when the bridges buckled. The other affected states are Rhode Island, Virginia, Delaware, and Maryland. The District of Columbia also was hit. The flood struck suddenly and unexpectedly a completely unprepared victims. Weathermen believe the Hurricane Diane had sent itself into the hills of central Pennsylvania, but the storm resurrected itself with smashing force over northern Pennsylvania. It staged its comeback after having hit the Carolina coast 2 days ago. The Weather Bureau blames today's massive downpours on the coastal course which was taken by Diane. Experts say the big blow picked up ocean moisture and dumped it inland along the coastal states. Tonight, Diane is reported to be moving toward the sea just west of Nantucket on Cape Cod, Massachusetts. In Connecticut alone, thousands of residents and campers were stranded. Army, Coast Guard, and National Guard forces used boats, amphibious vehicles, and helicopters to rescue them. Troops were rushed in by air to halt looting reported in Winsted, Connecticut. The entire business center of the evacuated town is said to have been wiped out. In other towns of the Nutmeg State, huge buildings disintegrated under the pressure of the floods. Some structures were ripped in half. The plumbing hung out of others. Men and women struggled through the water to save their possessions. Buildings were torn from their foundations and floated crazily in the flood. 4 major rivers swept over their banks in northeastern Pennsylvania. Damage is in the many millions of dollars and more in the offering. Governor George Leader summoned an emergency disaster committee at Harrisburg to take emergency steps. National Guardsmen already are on duty in several cities of the Keystone State. 10,000 blasting caps, which could kill anyone who handled them improperly, were washed into the Schuylkill River from a flooded powder plant at Tamaqua, Pennsylvania. They swept downstream toward Philadelphia, and all homes and establishments along the river were alerted to be on the watch for them. Army helicopters rescued more than 100 persons stranded in Port Jervis, including 36 members of a Boy Scout troop. Lesser floods struck Wilmington, Delaware, and suburban regions above the city. That's the picture regionally and nationally on the flood as a result of Hurricane Diane. Right now, we are awaiting more developments on the local picture as the flood affects the Easton area.
We interrupt this tape recording to bring you this urgent announcement. Chief of Police John I. Schwartz has just announced that all people are to be off the streets by 10 p.m. Chief John I. Schwartz has announced that all people are to be off the streets by 10 p.m. That is 7 minutes from now. All people must be off the streets by order of the Easton Police.